I've got a mixed bag of indie treats this week on Low Budget Binge, so let's not waste any time and get started binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. First up is an advanced review of a film that's going to be coming out later this summer called Roller Junkies. It's directed by Jared Masters and written by Jared Masters, James F. Gregory, and Elizabeth Rath. This is going to be a mini review of Jared Masters' new dark comedy, Roller Junkies. It's a mockumentary investigating the death of Allison, aka Black Lips, a wide-eyed country girl who moves to LA in order to expand her horizons. She immediately is taken under the wing of a roller girl gang called the Neons, who have a love-hate relationship with a rival gang, the Animals. Masters' fast and funny script bops from one member of the two gangs to the next in a documentary style, interviewing each of them and highlighting their numerous quirks, showing that they would rather talk about themselves than the death of their friend. This is a smart and fast-paced film that drives the point home that the LA and Hollywood crowd are some of the most vapid and self-centered people on the planet, but does so in an often hilarious way. Standout performances come from McKenna Alviso as the good-hearted Allison, who gets swept into this world. I also really love the post-Valley Girl line delivery of Elizabeth Rath as Crypto Kim. But all of the actresses that make up the two gangs are really good, delivering funny lines in this smart satire on California living. This is one of those films that celebrates the punk outsider movement of the early 80s like Rock and Roll High School, Suburbia, and the like. It definitely is a niche-style film, but Masters does a quality job of capturing the feel of the current entitled generation. This isn't necessarily a horror film, but it deals with some dark themes. But the real reason I wanted to shed some light on Masters' new film is because he is currently in the final days of his Indiegogo campaign for his next film, The Nightgown. Masters' strongest films are in the genre of horror, and The Nightgown promises to be a stylistic slasher. Having enjoyed Masters' indie efforts in the past, specifically Ballet of Blood, After School Massacre, and the truly unique Agalmatophilia, I'm very interested in The Nightgown. Jared Masters is the type of indie voice in low-budget filmmaking that we need to see more of. If you have a few extra bucks and like supporting indie horror, be sure to look down below before the comments to find the link to Jared Masters' The Nightgown Indiegogo page and give it some love. Next up is The Curse of Robert, aka The Curse of Robert the Doll. It's available streaming on Amazon Prime. It's directed and written by Andrew Jones. I reviewed Robert, or Robert the Doll, last week, and Robert's back. Stolen from the crime scene at the end of his first film, the doll is given to the owner of a museum and set up as a cursed attraction for big profit. When a young and naive student named Emily, played by Tiffany Seary, gets a night shift job at the museum, she is immediately spooked. And when the bodies of her co-workers begin piling up, she teams up with hunky night watchman Kevin, played by Jason Homewood, to uncover the evil secrets surrounding the doll who looks like a constipated Willem Dafoe. While the Robert the Doll series hasn't impressed me as much as the Bad Ben series did, I will say that there's a level of production that is better than your average lower-tier horror film. Shot mostly at a single location and utilizing very little effects other than spurts of blood here and there, director-writer Andrew Jones, who directed and wrote the original Robert the Doll, produces a slick and moody-looking film. There are some decent suspenseful moments as Robert scurries around in the shadows of the museum. There are also some nice nods to the original Robert, which actually still resides in a museum with a sign telling the passers-by to ask Robert for permission if you want to take a picture of him. or you're bound to be cursed by the evil forces that reside inside the doll. While there have been a few real-life incidents surrounding the doll after it was placed in the museum, it's nice to see the true tale of the doll is still being incorporated into this series. It's an interesting choice to depict the doll in the way it is shown in the movies. The real doll is much scarier looking, in my opinion, as it has no expression and a very blank face. For me, that's much more frightening than the scrunched-up puss of the movie doll. I guess those eyes with one milky iris is kind of creepy, but I find Robert's true form much scarier than the fictional one. There's a bit of divergence from the original in terms of how Robert works. In the original movie, Robert seems to be much more of an evil influence than an actual moving and killing toy. There's one scene where Robert takes a bat to someone in the original, but for the most part, it's more of an evil pall cast across the home than an actual active evil cursed doll. For me, that's what separated Robert from his American counterpart, Chucky. But in The Curse of Robert, Robert is much more active in his killing. There's POV shots showing him moving low to the ground. He pops up behind people and actually wrestles with his victims with razors and other weaponry. The Robert in this film takes a more hands-on approach with his kills. The lo-fi way the doll is simply moved by someone off-screen can be viewed as hokey or charming, depending on your tolerance for low-budget cinema. I found the jerky way Robert moves to be kind of unsettling, so it worked for me. Still, Robert moves in the cheapest way possible, and it shows. I was also impressed that this film is working with some kind of continuity. The Curse of Robert has an appearance from Robert the Doll star, Susie Frances Garton, reprising her role from the original. It also introduces a character who looks to be playing a major part in the next film, the Toy Maker, played by Lee Bain, who is layered under some really plastic-looking old man makeup. Still, it's fun seeing them expand the Robert universe a bit with this one. As with the first film of this series, I didn't hate The Curse of Robert, and I look forward to seeing where the story of this cursed doll goes next. We'll find out next week with Robert the Doll and the Toy Maker. Machination is new this week on demand and digital download from Nexus Production Group. It's directed by Sarah Jayne and Ivan Malekin. It's written by Ivan Malekin. An agoraphobic and OCD-afflicted woman, played by Steffi Thake, struggles with isolation, her troubled past, and mental illness at the height of the pandemic. Machination highlights the events of the last year or two effectively. It shows how some took the pandemic extremely hard in terms of the way it heightened many people's already frayed nerves and personal issues during the extended period of time staying inside, away from others, and alone with one's own thoughts. Being sort of an introvert myself, I have to say I loved the lockdown. I had more time to write, I started this YouTube channel, and tried to focus more on my creative side. Others didn't occupy their time so well, and this movie shows how it was devastating to one particularly damaged woman. Now, I think a lot of people don't really want to be reminded of the lockdown and the pandemic. Being so absorbed with it in the news and in every conversation, many just want to move on and not reflect on it. So I can understand why there are some who choose not to be interested in this film because of its too soon feel. Machination is also quite uneventful for long stretches of time. It goes to extreme lengths following the lead through the rigorous cleaning sequences any time she leaves the apartment, cleaning her shoes, stripping down from her clothes, washing her hands, washing her clothes, scrubbing the floor she walked on. It's somewhat interesting to watch this sad madness, but still, it's going to be a test of a lot of people's patience. There's an interesting story to get to once we understand the lead's compulsive behaviors, typical day and growing isolation she creates from her job, family, and eventually any life outside of her home. There are some gnarly shots of maggots and worms crawling all over her that will make your skin crawl, as she believes that she is dirty no matter how much she cleans herself and the apartment. This is the breaking down of a person, and it makes for some very depressing scenes. Steffi Thake is very good in this role. She seems fearless in showing herself in an unappealing light. Her depiction of mental illness is well done, and it's her performance that makes this a worthwhile watch. But if you do dare to match Machination, pack your patience, and those looking for escapist fiction venture elsewhere. It's a relentless character study that is literally ripped from the headlines, but it may be a little too real for people's comforts. Sin Eater is new on DVD and on demand from Indican Pictures. It's directed by Carmelo Chimera and written by Carmelo Chimera, Nicholas Chimera, and Robert O'Neill. A young woman on the run named Christine, played by Jessie Nerud, suffers a broken jaw and other injuries when she picks up a hitchhiker and then crashes her car. She wakes up in the home of a small-town sheriff, Isaac, played by Danny Bonin, and his eccentric father, Abraham, played by Scott Moore. Heavily medicated and with her jaw wired shut, Christine finds herself in the center of attention while she mends from her accident. Seems Christine has stumbled into the middle of an age-old cult in desperate need of a sacrifice. Sin Eater is extremely low budget, but not without merit. The acting is not the best. The lead Nerud isn't bad, but she's forced to talk without moving her jaw with a makeshift metal mouthpiece, which doesn't help her communicate her lines with much finesse. She may be a great actor, but this mouthpiece proves to be a hindrance to her acting abilities. I have to give it to Nerud, though. She isn't afraid to look bad, as sporting bruise makeup and that mouthpiece certainly isn't flattering, and she's stuck in it for about 95% of the movie. Sheriff Isaac, played by Bonin, delivers a much rougher performance with little nuance. Even in the beginning, when he's supposed to seem like a good guy, his intentions are pretty obvious and very cartoonish. The cast is elevated by a skosh with Bill Moseley as a priest who abused Christine when she was a child. His is a glorified cameo, which seems to be the norm in these low-budgeters, paying a name actor for a one-day shoot to elevate the prestige among the fans a bit. The story isn't bad. Cults are a bit overplayed these days, seemingly because of the cult-like status exhibited among the different political tribes and each's inability to understand the other. This theme highlights our mistrust in organized gathering and also plays well with amping the paranoia. For the most part, this works in Sin Eater, though it doesn't really offer up anything new to say. I like the gutsy ending, though much of the acting doesn't match the level of drama it requires. There are some really effective nightmare scenes where a heavily drugged Christine sees a devil emerging slowly from the shadows. This scene gave me true chills. I didn't love or hate Sin Eater. It passed the time well and had a few moments of goodness. Not the biggest recommendation, but there it is. Finally, we have Scare Zone. It's new on demand and digital download this week from Terror Films. It's directed and written by Jon Binkowski. A holiday haunted house attraction named Scare Zone preps for its biggest and best year yet. But this year a killer is on the loose in the attraction, and the guests have no idea if the carnage they are witnessing is fake or real. Scare Zone's heart is in the right place. It seems to definitely love the horror genre and these horror attractions that pop up all around during the Halloween time. There's definitely a sense of excitement in the air in this film. It's the same kind of excitement I feel around Halloween, and probably a lot of people who watch this channel. So good for these guys that they were able to put together a movie that seems to be set in a real attraction. Their exuberance about the fine art of scaring people is definitely communicated well on screen. That said, even though the props are fun, and the rooms seem to be decked out and planned to scare the pants off of the guests, the direction of the film really is a detriment for how the film looks and plays out. For the most part, Scare Zone looks like a sitcom, where most of the action takes place in the prop store. The comedy is extremely broad, and the characters paper thin, so everything takes on a cartoonish vibe. These over-the-top antics make it extremely difficult to get into any of the characters and buy into this premise. It just feels like a failed pilot for a sitcom that I stumbled across on YouTube. The two main characters are the best developed and most memorable of the bunch. Arian Ash and Chris Burns play the Ross and Rachel type couple who must overcome slashers, eager crowds, and other more personal obstacles to get together. Ash's Claire actually has some very disturbing problems, but they're minimalized to an almost offensive level and taken care of with a sweet talking to by Burns' character. It seems like some effort was put into fleshing out these characters, but the antics and sitcom feel really deters from any gravitas her issues might have had. The action is very well done during the climax when all hell breaks loose in the haunted attraction's final night. While still small scale, I kind of like the reveal of who the killer is and why he's doing it. It felt very 80s retro slasher to me. It seems Scare Zone was made over a decade ago, so I have no idea why it's being released now. Those in the mood for a lighthearted horror with little heft will not be disappointed by Scare Zone. It seems to have been filmed in an actual scare zone attraction during the off hours. I admire that kind of lo-fi ingenuity and love for the genre, which Scare Zone has heaps of despite its faults.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside